Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Lives. This is something that we do every Monday at 3 p.m. to figure out the future for smarter buildings. We are listed on mondaylive.org, just in case you wonder who we are. Just a reminder that views expressed here are personal and not of any company or organization. And please do post questions and comments on the Zoom chat so we can make it as interactive as we can. And just as a reminder, this deck is available on mondaylive.org, right there on the homepage, towards the bottom of the homepage, in case you want any of the links or any of the information we convey here. This being a new month of November, we have decided to spend the month talking about system integration. And specifically the future of system integration, where is it leading? So I think that's going to be a really interesting set of conversations this month. Very much looking forward to it. So our agenda, I know on news and trends, and we are just as a group going to be talking about the state of system integration today, and seeing where we start with this topic as we start this month talking about the future. But before we dive into that, Ken, what's going on in Ken World?
Ken World. We're pleased with the new site. We're starting to kind of achieve some of our goals and starting to get content posted. And what I'm liking is the posting stuff tends to start some dialogues. An example of that is last week we posted the great session that Jim put on secure BACnet, and that led to one of our sponsors, Contemporary Control, putting some more information on and including video. And that's kind of the interactive dialogue that I want, is that sort of, rather than trying to wait for a month to have these discussions, we can kind of get it into the realm of days. It's a good video, I think. Kind of bolsters exactly what the YouTube that was captured last Monday, which if you haven't watched, you definitely should. I've got a big message to the industry about how we have to kind of make this transition to communicate in HTML. It's a bit of a head shake for us all, or some of us. It's not, for me, I've always been a great HTML zealot, and way back, even prior to automated buildings, was writing and thinking in HTML rather than on paper. So we have to kind of make that transition, and it certainly is the way our speak is transmitted throughout the industry in HTML. So once we get it into HTML, then it becomes very easy to move it into social media just with a click of a button, and for people to share it with their networks. And I think that's important. The other thing I want to point out is that HTML is not only the way that we communicate with the industry, it's the way that the robots can actually read this stuff, and it's going to be the feedstock for AI. So I think that's kind of an important concept. And just an example of that, I've been using this little service, this daily paper thing, just to kind of watch to see how it works. I've been using it for a couple of years now, and it's a company called Finite out of, I'm not sure where they're out of, actually, Swiss company. And what it does is it basically looks at my LinkedIn, looks at my Twitter, looks at automated buildings, but it starts to extract the content, and then it goes out and it looks elsewhere on the web for more content. And so it does sort of two things. It actually shows what I'm thinking, but in addition to that, it gathers what other people are thinking about the same context. So quite often I find new companies, new articles and stuff that I had not seen or would not normally come to me. So I think that getting connected to AI. And of course, HTML is basically the language of augmentation and augmented reality. Boy, AR. Anyway, enough. Back to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken.
Anto, you mind if I say something about Ken?
Please.
Or really about this website? And it kind of ties into what we're here talking about today a little bit. Ken, it's been interesting and enjoyable to watch you evolve into this new style of website interaction with your customer base and so forth. And what strikes me is today we're talking about the systems integrator community. For me, it doesn't matter what you've been. It's like, what are you now and where are you going? And the same thing holds true for the system integrator community. I mean, they can learn a lot from you. It's like, here's what I was, and here's where I am now, and here's where I'm going. So I applaud you for doing that. And I say to all this conversation about the SI community, let's see where you can take yourselves.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
Hey, so just a couple of stories I saw in the last week that I thought were important and for our audience here. I found interesting. Drop off in the clean energy installations being completed. They noted that they're talking about installations. This one didn't address funding, but a pretty significant drop off compared to the previous year. You know, and as we're all trying to figure out how government policies, sustainability, and all of these factors will drive our industry and, affect our customers and clients. I thought that was interesting, significant drop off. The link is there for higher resolution picture and the article. And again, they focus on clean energy. So that's alternative energy, including battery storage, that type of thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting because I guess we've talked about a feeling that more's happening in the space and maybe more is building up to happen in the space, but they're tracking what is actually being installed. Also on that kind of tone, real estate investment plummeted in the third quarter. Again, we all, most of us are very involved in bringing technology and solutions to people in the built environment. So, investment, if that goes down, probably means certain sectors that we hope to serve will do less, right? If they're not going to lease the building, build the building, et cetera, could have an effect. So thought I'd share those two. People can review them and put them into the mix with all the other conflicting statements we get, just to try to figure out what's going on there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, John. How about that? Mark Peacock, I put up your slide here talking about Haystack Connect. I think the last piece of that is this week. So
Wednesday, yeah, Wednesday. So is
you want
Mark
to speak
here?
to that? Mark just joined.
Oh, okay. I'll let him talk about it then.
Oh, yes, our last in our webinar series is this week, and lots of good content, and enjoy it. I think we're delighted to wrap this up, and hopefully we'll be announcing, by the way, hopefully soon, a real in-person event in 2023 at some point here shortly. So
Great. Wonderful. This is my slide. There is COP27 started today in Egypt. So there's obviously a lot of news information coming out of that. The one on the left here, I've actually posted this before from a different report, but this is similar. I don't think the numbers were the same. It was a few $1 trillion different, but what's a few $1 trillion amongst friends? Just talking about the huge investment that's going to go into infrastructure driven by what's going on with addressing climate change. And this link that I put on the right is kind of a different way of thinking about that. It's a report that puts together a list of all of the countries, both from the perspective of how much each country has polluted and how impactful they're going to be from climate change, how vulnerable they're going to be. And it's kind of an interesting sort of view of what's going to happen in the next few decades. So I thought both of those would be worthy to share here. Any other thoughts or news or anything else anybody want to bring up before we start? No. Okay. So the future of system integration. So I think the way we should start this conversation here is to for each of us on the panel here is to really speak about why just talking about the future of system integration, about system integration in general, is important for us to dedicate a month of subject on Monday Live. So who wants to start?
All right. Who was that?
That's Mark, you go. I do not want to step in front of the man.
Come on.
All right. So I think obviously it's extremely important, as we've discussed in our planning meetings, but as I see it, it's important for a number of reasons. Number one, overall, I think the role of the system integrator is continually changing, and it's in changing because one, technology is taking us there, new products, new solutions. Two, this as a system integrator, the customer's expectations are changing. And number three is that in order to continue to be competitive in the marketplace and address things that are making building smarter, again, smarter, is that they have system integrators need to adopt to some of the newer things that we have seen. But the primary reason, again, I think, is the new expectations of a system integrator today by a building owner and operator.
Great, thank you. Bill, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I'll also say this is an important month for me. First, I plan on learning a lot about what you guys call systems integrators. But for me, a couple of things. First, understanding system integration, I would say across the spectrum, from just basic controls contractors to master systems integrators, will allow all of us to interact with that community, whether we sell software products, hardware, whatever. And potentially, I mean, I'm looking to learn to actually interact with this community in new and different ways. I also have to say, I kind of don't care what you used to do 10 years ago. Because like Mark suggests, with new technology and so forth, people are doing things today they never thought they'd be doing 4, 5, 6 years ago. And I'm here to say, we wake up in the morning bringing technology to the channel that actually keeps them relevant. So that's a service that gets us out of bed. So for me to actually learn more, I mean, we try to help the controls contractor trying to make a living, running around in that van, turning wrenches, to actually offer some services that moves them into, okay, at least the rent and the light bill's paid every month. I know it's paid because we're doing some analytics. We're selling some software, some services. Gets us out of bed in the morning. So I'm really looking forward to this kind of conversation. Anto, you look confused. Anto, you look confused. Did you look confused? Okay, good.
I kind of building on what Mark said as well, is that I think the role of the SI is fascinating because they're small, tend to be smaller and more agile than the bigger companies. And they do, they're evolving very quickly and they are adapting. When they started out many years ago, You know, they were what we used to term here as panel bashers. Then they added value in and started putting controllers on. Then suddenly they were doing the projects. And here in the UK now, the system integrators are actually, some of the system integrator companies are bigger than the controls companies. And in the UK, 73% of installed systems are put in by SIs. And they are picking up and adopting the technology as quick as anybody, you know, where they moved on to, they picked up integration quickly, you know, picking up products like, you know, Niagara and others, and just naturally accepted it all and carried on. And I think they're maturing into, you know, much more important people in the industry. You know, the MSI role, I think you see a lot of them drift into that area as well, where they are bridging the gap between, you know, what the customer demands are in the IT department and what goes on site. So I think they kind of, a lot of the future is going to be built around the movement of the SIs to fill that role.
I agree with that, and I think you guys on this call probably already know how I feel about that. But I see the SI or MSI. I see that probably the next few years, that's almost going to be its own separate. I don't want to say job, but I think it's more important today than ever. The talent that the SI brings or the MSI brings, because of the technology, the understanding of data, the impact of the systems to whatever the customer needs are, I think is by far more important. And I see it almost being a separate and distinct discipline. I'm also seeing you know, things like, you know, the controls contractor or mechanical contractor now getting more involved with integration, picking up on the controls side. I see more of, now that we have the IoT and the prop tech companies that are coming more into our industry, their knowledge is, gosh, I probably shouldn't say this, but it's a little bit limited, and we kind of know that. And so I think having an SI or an MSI for them is actually very crucial and very important as well. So I see the role of the MSI and the SI, I think largely maybe misunderstood, overlooked. I think it's going to be incredibly important going forward. And even with things like fault detection and diagnostics, you know, picking up and learning that it's a new tool to add to the toolbox for them. And I think that's going to be something that grows as the technology grows. MI, AL, or ML and AI and all this other stuff. I think there's going to be a lot of growth there for SIs.
I wonder what'll happen. Will the majors start to buy the largest systems integrators? Because it'd be such a talent pool and such a connection. So in the past, in the history of automated buildings, we see this evolution that somebody comes out, they start doing something new, and then they build and they pick up standards, they create new standards, all of this. Once they embed all of that in themselves, the typical pattern in the past has been that they get taken out by the majors. What's the feeling there? Do you think that will happen?
I think
we've been doing that for years here, and they did do that. And the couple of utility companies bought out some sizable system integrators, and then it started drifting away, because what makes DSI so successful is their agility, quickness to respond. The moment they become part of a bigger organization, they lose all that, and the guys who are running it actually recognize that they lost the KPI in the first place, which was this scale thing. As soon as you scale them up too big, they become not as effective as the kind of medium-sized SIs. So it kind of went round in full circle, and some of those bought out again afterwards.
If I could make a prediction on that, I think how we see SIs and how someone kind of not in this industry sees SI might be two different things. So I think, you know, certain, like the consulting firms may be looking at SIs as enabling data. So when you're looking at the ESG reporting and being able to get all that data, because it's going to have, if it's rules and regulations, as Roger, as you probably know, in the UK, you have to have consistency. for that data. And so I think you probably are going to see some of the, and you see it now with Accenture. So Accenture has that. You've seen it before with IBM. And I think you're going to see it with some of the big 5 consulting firms are going to start that way, are going to start bringing in SIs, not as systems integrators per se, as we see them, but as someone that can enable them access to data. And that's a prediction. So quote me on that one.
It's recorded, so we can play it back later.
Okay.
John, or your thoughts?
Yeah,
Why it's
sure.
important?
Yeah, I see a couple of key points I want to follow up on. I do think that they're misunderstood and undervalued. I think there's a kind of a general hope and wish and belief by the end customer that system integrators shouldn't be needed, right? This stuff should just magically connect together. And even if systems are interoperable, somebody has to put them together. So maybe the complexity of the integration work changes, hopefully diminishes, but balance that with this more and more things to integrate. So now if there's, now I used to have 10 things to integrate and it took me a day each. Now I've got 100 things to integrate and it only takes me an hour each. Well, guess what? You need me more, right? I'm gonna have more hours. Your system integration costs are gonna go up because there are more and more products, even if they have an open and interoperable interface. There is still work to be done, even if it's point and click work and isn't coding or whatever. And I think I'm concerned there's a lack of awareness and appreciation by the general market that as all these new technologies come out, it creates more of a need and adds more work to systems integration to connect them and make them work together, right? Even if they're open. So I see that dynamic. I hear that out there in the marketplace. And I think bridging that gap is something that needs to happen because, you know, if you have an owner operator just doesn't think there should be hours dedicated to system integration because everything should just magically work together, right? That isn't going to serve our industry well or the owner, right? They'll just be, well, these guys are, you know, they're trying to charge me too, right? Not appreciating the complexity that's involved.
So John, let me ask you on that, and anyone else on this call. That being said, I see a tremendous gap in the training and the education to be an integrator. And especially now with all this new technology. Do you think that, because, I mean, working with different integrators, they have, even integrators in the same company have different ways of doing things. Do you think that something like education is needed or necessary?
Yeah, I think we need education, but it seems to be that the technology is running ahead of anybody's ability to learn. There are so many skill sets now that are required by a system integrator when, you know, years ago we were talking about, oh, hey, you better learn IP networks because, you know, everything's going to IP networks. Okay, and that's still an important skill set. But now we're talking, well, you got to learn OAuth, single sign-on, SAML for what? Because of all the security and how we're going to make, you know, users log on and reset passwords and all of these types of things. And so the skill set required are moving very rapidly. And I think that you don't just, you know, take a 1-hour course and learn this stuff to the level of being able to practice it. You learn it to be aware of it and have a general understanding. But these are getting increasing, these subjects are getting increasingly deep and more complicated, not less, even if the systems are, you know, open and interoperable.
And I think I'd like to point out that a lot of the value is shifting to the life cycle cost of the building, the operating side. MSIs have always been focused on new construction and putting together and synthesizing and then handing off these systems. But as we go up those levels of complexity that Gina mentioned, that John mentioned, whether it's cybersecurity or analytics, a lot of the story in terms of the value proposition for the customers, how do you maintain this complexity that was installed at the outset? And how do you use that value? So I see the major challenge for the system integrators is to figure out how to cross the chasm to change their business models from a new construction only methodology to a life cycle cost value add.
Jim, do you think one of those barriers could be the contractual chain? You know, the fact that the SI tends to work for the contractor, and they've got that that contractor between him and the, if you like, the end users or anyone else above them, and they end up just being focused on getting what the contractor wants done for the set price and get them out as quick as possible.
I think it's a huge structural problem, Roger, but I think that the question's eventually going to get forced by the complexity of the technology. Because I don't believe that once people set this stuff up, it will do anything other than collapse unless some of that talent comes along to babysit it and operate it.
No,
So contractually, with the 100-year-old process that we build buildings with today, that's really fundamentally what has to change. But to me, it's a huge opportunity for the SIs to figure out how to span that gap, because there's a lot of recurring revenue. Once you've created a customer and created this value, why not take a ride on the future revenue stream of that indefinitely?
of course,
Yeah,
the big guys did do that because they recognized they got more out of the maintenance work afterwards than the contract itself.
They do.
That was also their downfall, in the fact that the customers recognized they were being locked in and started moving to SIs.
One thing I would say is that, there were some questions earlier about, well, what are the big guys going to do? The answer is they built a lot of this own capability into their models and channels for their largest customers right now. They're very sophisticated integration and network groups inside these customers. At big companies, the question is how do they span across their branch organizations, et cetera? And that's a harder problem for them. But to claim that they don't have a lot of that capability, I would argue that they have quite a bit of that capability. But it's not an easy task to syndicate that around their very large organizations.
Tracy, why do we need to talk about system integration?
I've been listening and thinking through what everyone is saying here compared to kind of what we see sometimes. And I think I agree with pretty much everything. The challenge that I always hear about when we're out talking to system integrators has to do with keeping up with the training, which I'm pretty sure we touched on that a couple of times. And in an operational production mode, daily doing my job kind of a thing, system integrators are not going out of their way looking for new technology to adopt and adapt, because it's a learning curve. They have to retrain all their installers and take them off, paying jobs and so forth. So there's this built-in resistance within the system integrator channel to take on new product lines and new technologies, and unless their main manufacturer, whomever they're aligned with, sort of is pushing on them to do that and provides the training. So for us to expect that the system integrator channel is keeping up with new developments, probably unrealistic, unless there's specific adoption of a particular controller line or software or something like that, where they're out seeking that training. So inherently, the market's not going to just follow along with new development, right? It's going to take an extra push on that.
But because many SIs are small and nimble, as Roger was saying, does this create opportunities for new SIs to adopt new technologies that they are much more comfortable with than others?
I think the SME-led system integrator, the guy who grew up or gal who grew up doing this and is sort of technology in their bloodstream and kind of geek out on that kind of a thing, and now they own a company, they are likely going to be the most successful at keeping up and moving forward. Anyone who starts establishing processes and have larger teams that they're dealing with, that's when that natural resistance to adoption of anything new kicks in, and they're just I won't say they're not interested, because of course there are situations where everybody has to adopt and adapt and evolve. But under normal circumstances, they're not going to do anything new and different. They're going to perfect what they're doing now and not go out of the way to look for new things to learn.
But Tracy, to add to what you did, or one point you made was, or what we've been talking about, the training, and they don't, there's some reluctancy to adopt to new offerings, technology or whatever. I believe that that is one of the major impetuses for the mergers and acquisitions and all the buying of system integrators that is going on. To your point, I'm system integrator A. My specialty is this. All right, but I'm being asked by my customer base, and for me to be more competitive, I need to be able to offer B and C. Yes, it's going to cost training. I don't have the time. I don't have the manpower. We're busy as hell like it is. So let's merge. Let's bring these together. And I think that's why you're seeing a much more aggressive approach right now in the marketplace of people bringing various system integrators together as one entity.
Well, I think that's a financial decision, to be honest. That roll up has more to do with investment banking and investment and selling off.
That too, but again, it's the services, because again, ultimately in the future, will the 1-2 person SI organization be able to survive? I don't know.
Yeah, you know what I'm seeing, you kind of reminded me of some conversations that we had recently, but we're starting to see some system integrators align with specific applications. Traditionally we've seen HVAC or we've seen lighting, but now I'm seeing IAQ installers and integrators, or security. Well, there was always security people, but there's some of these new sort of applications that are getting a little bit more mainstream. We're starting to see people capitalize on that opportunity and align with those. So it's not that everybody in the channel is staying stagnant. I don't mean to imply that. One of the frustrating things that we've experienced is this built-in resistance to evolve and move forward with new technology, right? It's frustrating when you're kind of the company on the front end of things like that.
I think that's some of the older companies, Tracy, and I think you might see some sort of segmentation where, yeah, there's some people who are going to be happy just doing the traditional controls bit with the panels and the commissioning stuff, but you're going to get more and more people who are doing the integration, or they are actually taking stuff to the cloud, and they will be able to talk with the IT guys, and you may just see it breaking up a bit. That the SI role itself.
Yeah,
I
think a lot of it is aligned with the manufacturers, right? Depending on which manufacturers they're supporting. If they're truly, well, nobody's truly independent where they have no alliance, because there's a learning curve with every new line that you carry, right? So even if you're quote unquote non-aligned or independent, you have a few tricks in your bag that are your go-to sort of systems and tools, right? So those companies, in my experience, are the ones who evolve and adapt more quickly to the changing market and market conditions. So you'll see them adopting more things more rapidly, if that makes sense. But the other thing too, I agree, anyone that's heavily associated with sort of the old guard, resistant to change. And then the other sort of attribute that I see is the larger they are, the more resistant they are to change, which, coming back to what Mark was saying with these roll-ups and so forth, I think what we're going to see are certain parts of these roll-ups will do certain applications or certain vertical market installs and integrations, as opposed to sort of across the board, we're system integrators, right?
Mhm.
They'll have teams or groups that will do certain aspects.
Okay, there's
So-
another aspect of this, though, is I see that the systems integrators often get adopted by building owners or large facilities. It's so hard to get people that once they find a good systems integrator, that's their systems integrator. And so somewhat the integrator can only go as fast as the company he's tied to. If he gets tied to a very aggressive company who's willing to try almost anything, he has a golden opportunity to grow, get educated. So there's that relationship. And I think that's why it tends to, the scale of the systems integrator tends to be smaller because they get attached to particular owners. They have a very strong relationship. So I think that's an interesting aspect.
Yeah, and
So
I
what-
think that the ones who align with forward-thinking owners are the ones who are out there kind of pushing the edge a little bit more often too. Yeah.
So one of the things about smaller, more nimble companies is that they tend to partner and collaborate with others, right? So we haven't heard that in this discussion so far. I was going to ask Roger, do you see SIs in the UK work with each other? I mean, as a standard behavior? I know it happens, it has to happen in certain project stuff, but is that a preferred way of doing things that when they get beyond their capabilities?
Yeah, so here the market's been evolving for quite a long time. I mean, there's even for a small industry, there's over 400 SIs here in the UK, and they own about 74% of the market. So the big guys, manufacturers, are in the minority now. The Johnson Controls, Siemens pulled out altogether to do projects. But what you're actually seeing is that there was a consolidation of some system integrators many years ago, but that's kind of slowed down, and you're seeing them grow organically. They do get challenged because usually it's the finance lady that's also the HR person, that's also the IT person, and they don't know how to scale up at that point and kind of implode. And then you suddenly get a whole bunch of other small system integrators that start again. And because they are now less secretive about it, and certainly the guys who provide the products tend to have more meetings and stuff. Each of the SIs know each other and are quite open about what they're doing. So you do get that kind of movement, and you are seeing what Ken said, where they're getting involved with customers, and the customers are pulling on them to support them to get what they're really asking for over and above the mechanical contractor and consultant. And so I think you are seeing that, and it then becomes regional, how much they can actually handle, because they all have limited capabilities. And additionally to that, there's always a limited skill. You know, there's shortages in the marketplace, which really challenges everyone. And then you kind of get people moving around continually. And the challenge is that because the bigger guys did move on, there's very few, and we've talked about this before, of people coming into the market and doing apprenticeships and stuff. But I think more younger people are being attracted in because they're interested in that middle ground of the technology, perhaps, rather than the grunt work in the field. So it's kind of developing everywhere, but there certainly is a bigger feeling now with the SIs of them being more, how can I put it, friendly to one another than it used to be in the industry.
You know, one of the things that we saw for a long time, where we would see these sort of independent, regionally based system integrators pop up. These are people who split out of larger companies or whatever the case might be. And then they realize they're business owners, not just technical and contractor implementers, let's say. So we see a couple of different patterns that arise from that. One is a little bit where there's a alignment either with a group of others, or a building owner, or a limited set of building owners, or the pattern that we see quite often with the really smaller guys is they'll spend a few months winning new business and kind of queuing up the pipeline. And then it's the same people who are winning that business are going out and installing, so you don't hear from them again for 6 or 7 or 8 months, right? And then they're back again winning new projects. So it's go out and kill something to eat and then go make it happen, you know? So there is a tipping point at which integrators, I think, hit critical mass where they have enough business to jump to the point where those two activities are different people, right? And that's a really important point in the life of an integrator. And there's nothing wrong with the first. You know, if you want to go out and be innovative and just win the business that you want to win and then go do it, that's a perfectly valid business model in my mind. But if you're looking,
they normally have just a small range of customers as well. They might only have 5 or 6 they always deal with, but they'll always be the guys that call in on the site on the way home to fix something that the customer complained about too.
Yeah, well, it's in back to what Ken was saying. Once an owner finds an integrator or an integration company they're comfortable with and they trust, there's a strong tendency to stick with the incumbent at that point, right? Once they find them, they want to stick with them. And it's amazing. I will see the smallest of companies, the 1-2 man kind of shop that are doing work on the biggest buildings with the biggest customers just because of that trust that gets created, right?
Steve, can you chime in here, Steve?
Happy to. So I think that the question is, what's the future of systems integration? Okay. So from an evolutionary perspective, I see 2 streams. One is on the technology side and the other is on the business model side. Okay. So we've hit on a number of the technology issues. So networking, cybersecurity, integration, cloud computing, data analytics. There's 5 right there. Okay, so when you list them all out and you start to think about what each one entails, it's a lot. It's a lot for one systems integrator to go from what was traditionally putting in a controller to modulate a valve and open and close dampers and start and stop fans, to having to have the knowledge around all these other related technologies that allow all that to happen, and then to take advantage of all the data that comes out of that system for optimizing energy and operations. But it's all happening, right? So basically there's no escaping the fact that these technologies have come into the space, and the successful, I think the more successful systems integrators are the ones that are they're going to find a way to embrace these technologies and get good at them. So that's the one stream, if you will, of how do I adjust to this ever-changing technology world and get my organization to where it's effective so that it can capitalize on the benefits to my customers and to my operation in many regards. Then you got the business model. And in that bucket, I would say there's one of the big things is to move towards increasingly a services approach, as opposed to the traditional just construction. I put the job in and I leave it. Okay, because a lot of these new technologies, by their nature, require continuous attention. So you're not going to get the value of data analytics if you don't take the data and do something with it. You're not going to get the value. You can't keep buildings secure by not managing the cybersecurity risks on an ongoing basis, because they're always evolving, right? So networks all have to be managed because there's so much that goes into them. Okay, so a lot of the smaller SIs don't have a history of selling service agreements. So being able to get smarter about how to do that, but instead of doing sort of the traditional service model, which maybe a Johnson or Honeywell branch was selling, now it's more of a service model around these technologies and how to really capitalize on them. So you've got this whole concept of subscription services. Well, you got all these technologies. So how do I take my staff and make them expert in all these areas? Well, reality, that's hard. You know, we've mentioned about the training, and certainly we've got to have good resources available for training people. But what I see happening overall in the technology world is the availability increasingly of independent, I'll call them fractional resources within specific technology areas, that you can, instead of buying a whole person or trying to take one person and make them skilled in 5 different areas, that you've got their core capabilities, and then the areas where you're weak, you can go buy a portion of a person as needed. They're out there. And they're increasing in availability, and they're not necessarily that expensive. So this building out a community of fractional resources, I think, is going to be key to making this happen. And the integrators that identify these resources and develop the relationships are going to benefit from it, because when they need the resource, they're going to be able to call on it. Okay. So the services, the fractional resources, marketing, shifting from a bid and spec mentality to an owner approach to selling their services, being able to know who to call on in the owner and develop the relationships and the trust, and being able to go up the hierarchy within the organization. That's a different set of skills than just responding to a bid. But if you're going to sell these subscription services, what are they? They're to the owner. So they're going to be much harder to sell through the traditional contracting approach. But when you can build that trust and the respect of the owner that yeah, they need this and they want this, now you have essentially a locked-in service business of high value. So that's the other piece that I see. So just to make sure I covered them all, marketing, and then marketing in general. So Mark will like this one, but how many systems integrators know how to put together any kind of a marketing campaign to actually reach out to the companies within their region and make themselves known and get the word out? And again, there's a lot of high value, low cost techniques now available that any size organization can take advantage of to get their name and awareness and their offerings made available to their community. So there's evolution going on both fronts, on the business model side and on the technology side, and they obviously interact. But yeah, that's when I look at the future of the systems integrators. You should start to see those characteristics showing up in the organizations.
I
So,
agree.
Anna, you come in. I just want to give a chance for Anna to chime in.
Sure, of course.
Why do you think talking about system integration is important for us?
Well, I think it's the people that they're the deliverers, right? They're the ones who actually execute and make things happen. At the end of the day, we can build technologies all day long, building on it's been wanted to happen, but someone has to deliver and maintain and make sure it keeps running. In fact, interestingly enough, my analogy is what happened to the automotive, repair industries. Like Tracy said, I used to have a mechanic down the road, who looked after my 12-year-old Mazda. He was brilliant. He's kept this thing on the road for the last 12 years. But he's not keeping up with the latest in EVs and, later technologies. I doubt I'm going to bring back, next technology cars to him, because he's not really invested in keeping up with the technologies and stuff. But then on the other side of the spectrum, if you were to equate the MSI model, you go to one of these newer, BMW or any of the larger repair places now, the technologies they have and the training that they put into those technicians, and are really, really well skilled. So I think to me there's an interesting parallel transformation stuff that's happened in the automotive repair support stuff. And you still have to go to those guys to make it all happen. There's no other choice I've got, right? So you
totally agree with that, Anna. There is an added challenge if you want to be an independent mechanic these days. Trying to get the training required to work on new cars only comes from one source typically, and that's the manufacturer. And the manufacturer is not in a hurry to train independent mechanics. They want all of that work to go through their dealers, right? Building control systems, very much the same situation, right? If you're not a dealer aligned, strongly with a brand, trying to get the training you need to work with that brand's products, let alone just get the products, get the tools, right?
The tools, yeah.
Yeah, nearly impossible. So being an independent controls integrator is going to get tougher and tougher as time goes on. And I think we're going to see, just kind of a closing thought for me, I think we're going to see how we think about integration change over the next 5, maybe it'll take a little longer, 10 years, where it's not controls integrators as much as data integrators, right? Get the data, you apply it to a third party platform, and that's where we're going to see the independence kind of rise again.
Right. So going back to that, the consulting firms, they're going to look at them as data engineers in a way, for lack of a better term. But back to something Steve was saying, when we talk about SIs, we're thinking, okay, you're going to integrate in. It was a question that Bill popped into the chat. When you're talking about SIs, you're talking about, okay, I'm going to integrate the BAS, the lighting, the elevators, some life safety. Then let me throw in a little bit of low voltage card access, Maybe let me integrate into your PMS, your FMS, or something of that nature, right? But then when you look at certain, and I can talk about certain projects that I've been on as a consultant to these, you're now getting SIs that are being asked to be technology consultants as well as integrators, because they actually have that experience. But when you actually look at some of the things that go beyond that technology, you're seeing them want to integrate code generation, solar panels. If you're looking at, if you're looking at a hospital, they're asking you to do inpatient systems linked to documents, and very specialized piece of equipment that they're being asked to do. And so I think that that's going to become more prevalent in the next few years because of the need for that data. And so I think you're gonna see systems integrator, whereas before, because I still struggle to this day to be able to name, a handful of systems integrators, right? In the next few years, I think there's going to be a huge demand for that. And then, to be able to know some of those things, even in a hospital, if you look at the number of systems that hospitals are asking to be integrated in so they can have access to that data in a concise and consistent manner and format, it's extremely important to them from the regulatory perspective. That an SI or MSI will be inundated with learning that and going out and having to research those different specialized systems for that integration. So if nothing else, I'm saying that it's going to be, I think it's going to be a very specialized technical person that kind of emerges from all of this.
Yeah, and I think just circle back to my analogy though, Gina, that's what I was saying, right? There's still going to be the guy who's going to look after the valve and the thermostat and stuff, but just like the car industry, there's a whole bunch of new technologies in these new cars that my local guy is never going to touch, and I'm going to have to find the guy with the skills and the technologies and the training and everything else to go do that, right?
So my thoughts on why system integration is important is that as technologists and vendors, we all produce bits of what is eventually a building owner needs to have in his or her building, right? So the process is inherently lots of things that needs to go into one thing, because the building owner is basically wanting one thing, is to manage and operate his or her building. So something or somebody has to do that, right? So to me, that's obviously where SIs come in. But to me, the question is the effectiveness of that process. How do you actually do that? Especially there are different types of buildings. There are big buildings, simple buildings, complex buildings. And they all need to have this mashing up of all of the different systems to satisfy the needs of the owner. So to me, that's kind of what when I hear a system integration, I'm thinking about that, but also thinking about how to make that whole process a lot more efficient.
I'd like to
Yeah.
offer a blasphemous idea here. You know, we've just spent the last hour talking about how complicated and all the barriers for SIs to learn how to face new customers, learn and keep up with new technologies. Maybe there's an idea that SIs won't own this future at all, that they'll decay into Anno's repair shop, and that new structures will come up. There's nothing to say that SIs have to own this future, especially if it's too hard a lift for them to get there. But it could be something new entirely.
But the universe likes efficiency. I mean, that's what happens over time, right? Industries morph towards efficiency. So maybe that's another way of saying it, Jim.
Okay. I tend to agree with Jim, and I am also concerned about the business model end of things, right? Enclosed dealers versus open independent integrators, territorial, geographically based focus from a business standpoint, rather than something that's a little bit broader in scope. I'm not sure I have the answers in which direction that's going, but that's been a force holding back innovation in the integration world for a very long time.
And I guess though, let's not forget also that, you know, the car is one chunk of thing. I know it's many things pulled together, but it's sold as one unit, whereas a building is many factions, lots of different things. So nobody can really lock you in like one manufacturer could to a car where you have to go and plug it into his system to get it resolved. There's a lot more bits and pieces. And I think that my own view is, you know, don't kind of underestimate the SIs. You know, they do this day in, day out. We're able to talk around this now, and they're faced with these challenges every day. And whilst there may be some that remain as is, I think there'll be a lot progress. And I think what you said, Tracy, is true. I think, you know, and with Jim saying about it breaking up, I think it will. I think you'll start getting specialist areas for different jobs, and you may see it falling into different type roles. But you know, it happens. That's how some of the MSIs came about today, as they evolved into that role. And I think you're going to see just more and more people breaking away, perhaps from the traditional bit. And the other key will be is the tools that are supplied by the people that do provide the product are making it easier and less complex. The whole idea is, how quickly can I get in and get out of a job? And by the way, can I do it and commission it remotely almost as much as I can? So that will help them be more efficient.
Love it. I really love it. First of all, I thought Brian Turner was a boomer. All right. So I'm just going to say that right now. Secondly, Jim, very interesting. But I was going to end with one thing for me. A year ago, I sat in a room with a bunch of boomers, and they're like, we feel like we should connect all these customers we have. Now here they are with 100 connected buildings, 75 or 80 connected people, and then they can start to consume all the products that you folks sell out there. So there is hope for the traditional SI, whatever you want to call it. And then, Jim, I hold on to a future that there is something new that springs up too.
Well, Bill, you say you guys sell, but your product is dead center in all of this for all of us, right? So
yeah.
So just layer another learning curve on top of everything is the cybersecurity requirements and needs.
That's right. Cool. So this has been a great opening conversation for this month. I think we've sort of laid the groundwork for some more shows digging into exactly how we're going to structure it. We'll find out next Monday because we'll discuss it in our planning call. We have a planning call every Wednesday. So. Cool. Anybody feel compelled to make one last comment before we wrap?
I already feel like the Rolling Stones. My final comment is 3 times now.
Okay, so let's wrap it. We'll get the video up tomorrow or the day after, and we'll be back next week. And hope everybody has a happy, a good week. Tomorrow is voting day, so if you haven't, you should do that.
Go vote.
Go vote.
All right, bye all.
Bye.
Bye.